Well, thanks. We know that tourism is a huge part of the London economy. In 2018, there were 20 million international visitors who spent about £12 billion in the capital. But crime rates in the tourist areas, both serious knife crime and other crime like robbery, theft from the person, vehicle crime, are way above the average, amongst the highest in the country. And this, I think, has a significant impact potentially on the tourist industry. Now, we've had some figures, which I got from a question to the Mayor last time, I think, and they show hundreds of offences in Holborn and Covent Garden and even more in the West End compared to the local population. Yet, the numbers that are identified as tourists were 2.1% of victims in Bloomsbury and 3.4% in West End. So either the local community are being disproportionately victimised by a huge amount, and I have to say that they do feel very victimised as well as tourism, or you're not recording them properly. And when I put these figures that you supplied to the local community, and in particular local hotels, they laughed at them basically, saying these are way, way underestimates, even given the height of the numbers that are there. One hotel said we had 5 incidents in the past week alone and many more attempts on a daily basis. Guests wait longer than a week to be even contacted by the police. Another one, these are proper legitimate hotels. Many tourists don't bother reporting because they know there's nothing's going to happen. Another big hotel reporting 2 to 3 incidents a week. They want to report them so they can supply CCTV, but there's no follow-up. It's a major issue for both the local economy in the West End, because if London gets a reputation as being a crime-ridden city, people are going to stop coming. And it's also a big issue for local people who are also victimised on the same basis. The numbers are staggering. In Oxford Street, there were 709 crimes per 1,000 residents compared to the London average of 9. In Holborn and Covent Garden, 42 compared to the London average of 9. Huge numbers. I'm just wondering what you're trying to do to deal with this, bearing in mind the significant underreporting even on those big figures.
So in relation to the tourist question, I think it's very clear if you look at the figures that they won't be accurately portraying the problem with tourists being victims of crime. Situation which we've looked at, the situation, and I agree with your figures. The situation is that we don't mandate that people have to declare as tourists. Now that might seem a bit daft. I mean, if you've got a strong American accent and you're in a hotel in the middle of Westminster, chances are you're a tourist or on business or something. There are many of the millions of people you've talked about are tourists from other parts of the UK. They may not declare themselves as tourists, so it might come up in the inquiry, but it may not go onto the crime report. Therefore, in terms of when you look for the statistics, they don't appear as tourists. So I think there's a recording issue which we can look at to see if we can address that. But in response to the issue, I spoke in the last week with the BCU commander Helen Harper for Westminster, which is covering most of the areas, well, not all, but most of the areas we're talking about. And she was aware of the situation. In fact, it was discussed at her recent strategic community safety group meeting with Westminster City Council. I've asked her to call a meeting which either she or one of her detective superintendents will represent the Met at, of the local hoteliers and the business groups, to come together to see if there's something more we can do to properly record where their guests are victims, and to make sure that we are dealing with them as effectively as possible. Obviously, we don't want the situation where people are deterred from coming to London as tourists. We also don't want the situation where they think, I won't bother reporting it because nothing will happen. That's not true. I mean, I accept what you say about some delays. That may be the case, but I'm also reliably informed by the Chief Superintendent that they spend a great deal of time dealing with tourists as victims in Westminster, and they understand it is an ongoing problem. So what we can do is we can convene a meeting of the interested parties and see if there are some things we can do to address the problem. Part of it is preventative. We need to make sure that tourists have got some advice around personal safety. I'm not trying to blame victims in any shape or form. All I'm saying is that people need sensible advice and act sensibly in and around London, and be aware that there is a criminal element out there. You asked at the end, what are we doing about it? So Westminster is one of our, quite clearly and obviously, is one of our busiest and most densely populated urban areas in London. It's got high crime rates. So crime rates on Oxford Street are going to be high because you have a variety of crimes, shop theft being a major one. But I mean, it's very difficult to answer the question. I have page after page of operations that have been run by the borough in relation to this. So, let me just do one. 17th and 18th of December, 33 search warrants were successfully executed to deal with drug dealing in and around London's West End, which is a driver of violent crime. 30 subjects were arrested. All of them have been charged with a total of 146 offences and either remanded in custody or on a very short bail date to go to court. We have hundreds of officers in Westminster deployed on proactive duties in and around, working very closely with City of Westminster and with the business improvement districts and all of the staff that they employ as uniformed street staff to try to keep the streets safe in Westminster.
But Westminster's only half the story, isn't it? If you look at Camden, the 3 southern wards in Camden account for 40% of the overall crime in Camden, which is a staggering proportion. Mm-hmm. And the hotels I quoted to you were actually Camden hotels.
I know that, because I know the ones you're talking about.
You've talked about what you've done with Westminster. Have you been in contact with Chief Superintendent Coley to do this? And also, would it not make sense to try and do a cross-borough approach to relation to this? Because the crime can dodge it backwards and forwards across the Camden and Westminster boundaries all the time. I mean, with respect, I think we know that. I think we know that crime crosses boundaries, and I'm sorry, I was speaking in shorthand. Yes, a number of the incidents that I've got that you've got are actually in relation to what happened in Camden, and Raj Kohli and I have discussed it, and the meeting will be cross boundary, involving as many of the hotels as we can get to come to the meeting to try and talk about the issues. Many of the things I've talked about also are in evidence in Camden. Camden is an area that's had a great deal of success in proactive operations, against all the moped crimes that were taking place in Camden and Islington. I think we've seen a bit of a morphing away from that because the percentage of those crimes is reduced 50% and 40% year on year, and they have reduced to a very low, still unacceptable but low level. Some of that has now moved into street robbery on foot or on pedal cycles. Is a recent phenomenon as well, and Camden are reacting to that and trying to lock up as many people as possible in relation to it. So I'm sorry, I wasn't meaning to dismiss the fact that it was only Westminster. I know it's not. Yeah, well, I mean, I can accept that Camden Town's got a lower crime rate, and Camden Town has significantly more police officers dedicated to the ward than do the 3 southern wards. In Camden Town, it has 6 PCs and a crime rate of officers of 57 crimes per month compared to the 193 for the southern wards. So maybe we need to have a bit more focus on the southern wards where this is happening, both for residents and for tourism.
I don't accept that premise. The reality is that officers are deployed in a proactive manner and in preventative patrol in relation to crime hotspots. What you may be talking about is dedicated ward officers. That's one thing. They're dedicated ward officers, so they're geographically located. That's not the entirety of our resources.
So what other resources are you putting into the southern wards in Camden and West End?
I'd have to come back to you in detail on that.
Well, if you could, that would be helpful.
I'm happy to, yeah.
You mentioned you were doing these robbery proactive teams. Are they operating in the 3 southern wards of Camden and in West End?
So they're operating where the problems are. That's my point. They're deployed on it. We don't sort of say, right, you're based in that ward and you're based in that borough and you just get on with it and don't ever leave. Proactive teams will move to deal with the groups of people that are causing the problems, the individuals that are causing the problems, and they will focus preventative patrols where the problems are, not stand by in the next ward looking at it and going, oh, that's bad.
Well, as I said, I accept that and I think you've accepted when I put it to you, that it goes across Westminster and southern Camden. The problem really is those figures are enormous compared to London as a whole and compared to the rest of the country. So that's why I'm saying these areas ought to be getting a bit of priority in relation to some of this activity.
But they are getting priority. I mean, that's what I'm trying to put across. We don't police across the whole of London. in a uniform fashion. Our officers are proactive, and they also react to where the hotspots are, and that's where they go, and that's where they patrol, and that's where they're working in plain clothes, surveilling people and trying to interdict criminals. We do that tasking on a daily basis. So officers are moved around regularly. The ones that are not, wherever we can avoid it, is dedicated ward officers who we expect to be geographically located. Everyone else will move to deal with the problem, or move to deal where the problem is and try to prevent it happening day on day.
Okay.
This is the daily work of the Met Police.
Okay. Well, if you could let me have details, as you mentioned,
yes, I will.
and also the details of this meeting, which is going to be Westminster and Camden.
Yes.
Chief Superintendents to look at
Sure.
what can be done in particular.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we'll try to convene the meeting, but the point is to get the hoteliers and
well, if you let me know, I
partners
can
there.
try and help get the hoteliers there,
I'm sure, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thanks.
as well as local residents who are affected.